Hi, Blogging Heads viewers. This is Daniel Strauss on another episode of Woodruff and Strauss. And today I'm very excited to have senior digital correspondent at CNN, Chris Moody, on here. Hi, Chris.
I am a poor stand-in for Betsy Woodruff, but it's great to be here.
I am broadcasting from my home in Chicago, actually my parents' home in Chicago, where I'm visiting for the holidays, so I might yell at any moment, where's the meatloaf, Mom? Meatloaf. And that was a joke Chris just made before we started. Anyway, so we're going to talk the big news of the day first, and then we're going to get into talking about margaritas and Steve King with Chris. But first I wanted to talk about Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel resigning, but I use that term lightly because very quickly reports and hints and whispers came out that he was asked to leave, forced to go in some manner or another. And yeah, I didn't see this one coming. What do you think?
Well, let's not sugarcoat this. He was fired.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, we call this a resignation. But look, this was the textbook example of a Washington firing, if there ever were one. Look, let's go through it here. Okay. First of all, is leaked to the New York Times. So there's your first point of humiliation of the Washington firing. Mm-hmm. It's reported in the paper before you might even find out. I'm sure he knew about it, but before a lot of people knew about it, or before the boss, President Obama, gets to announce it publicly.
Right.
Secondly, Hagel goes on national television and has to stand in front of his boss, President Obama, on TV while he says how great he is, but he's fired. Third, he has to hug his boss after his boss just told him that he's fired. Step 4, I believe, is writing a tell-all or a memoir that completely just dumps on President Obama. Right. I have a feeling this is all going to come to fruition.
And that's happened with the last two, right? With Gates and Panetta, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but this was just absolutely textbook how it works in Washington. It's a humiliating process. I mean, imagine if we had to stand with our bosses in front of millions of people and have them pretend to say how wonderful we are, and then, by the way, get out.
Yeah, I thought the whole – I mean, what struck me was that on Twitter there were a lot of people who were saying, like, this is the most awkward press conference in a while. And
then they hugged.
Yeah, and then they hugged, and Biden was standing there. It was just all really kind of strange all the way through.
Was a pretty close ally of his. From what I mean, I don't cover Hagel or defense that much, but from what I read, so I mean, probably was taking all Biden had to just keep his mouth shut.
I know it's all. We all know it's difficult for Joe Biden to keep his mouth shut sometimes.
I've heard.
So. Yeah, I have to be honest, though, like the sense I've gotten in the reporting I've seen is that Hagel was, he sort of was not happy with the chain of command and what was going on, sort of the structure of defense and the defense team in the Obama administration in the White House. And that's the whispers that I've seen a lot of. I'm especially surprised about this because Hagel coming in he was supposed to be this big consensus guy who could work, who could push policies that the Obama administration agreed to and at the same time Republicans were okay with. And I mean, Republicans have been very, very eager to criticize Obama on handling of ISIS and counterterrorism lately. So obviously that wasn't working.
Well, this felt weird from the start, didn't it? I mean, you had coalitions of Democrats and Republicans from the very beginning against Hagel, working against him. It just felt like he was pushing back on a lot of opposition from the very beginning. And not to mention just how difficult the job is in general, especially at this time in the world when so many terrible things are happening. And the United States is in the middle of shifting its policy toward a really hot part of the world in the Middle East. I mean, this is difficult times. And, you've got to have somebody who's firing on all cylinders and working with you as president in order to be successful. And from the reporting I've seen, that just wasn't happening.
Yeah, I mean, it also kind of like struck me as unusual for the Obama administration on this. Because this just isn't really how Obama usually works with moving people out. And I think that he gives people more of a chance. There are sometimes reports out that, ex-staffers, unnamed staffers in the White House aren't happy with, or in the community with, Y person or Y colleague or something. And that's usually kind of a warning sign that comes out of the administration in some form. But this wasn't at all. This was clearly, it's very much news, I think, to a lot of Washington who isn't in the defense area, that there was a lot of discontent with Hagel, and he had to go. And it's also unusual because this is the third Secretary of Defense, which is kind of a lot. There's usually a lot of turnover in any two-term presidential administration, but 3 Secretaries of Defense is a lot.
And look how, the Attorney General has lasted the entire time.
Right.
And also people have pointed out that this announcement came as nuclear talks crumbled with Iran. We don't have to be conspiracy theorists here to be like, okay, maybe someone was trying to preempt that terrible news.
Mm-hmm. Now, I usually hesitate to go to like who's next in the list of names, but it's predictable in these situations when there's a high profile resignation or firing, that someone else, that names start to come out immediately. My alma mater, The Hill, I felt had a really good list. But just before we started taping, Ted Cruz mentioned Joe Lieberman as Secretary of Defense.
Oh, gosh, how to make heads explode in Washington, especially Democrats and liberals.
Obviously, that's not going to happen for a few reasons, besides the fact that it's Joe Lieberman and it's President Obama who would have to nominate him. Obviously, Democrats don't want to do anything. They don't want to follow Ted Cruz in any sort of shape or form here.
Let's give Ted Cruz credit for the superb trolling that he pulled off.
This is grade A trolling. This is the Kobe beef of trolling right there. This is the good stuff. The names that I've heard that were mentioned around today that I thought were pretty interesting, actually, Lindsey Graham mentioned Jack Reed of Rhode Island, Senator Reed, Michelle Flournoy, who's been mentioned a few times and was said to be in the top 2 last time the Obama administration was on the hunt for a Secretary of Defense, and Ashton Carter, who was a Deputy Secretary of Defense. Reed is especially interesting to me because he's constantly mentioned for like a promotion of some kind. He was on the short list in 2008 to be vice president, and obviously didn't get that. He had been mentioned before for Secretary of Defense, and the rumor was during the Hagel pre-confirmation period that Reed really wanted to chair Senate Armed Services, but especially if Carl Levin retired, and that seemed likely, but now Republicans are going to control the Senate in the 114th Congress. So, I got to ask you, what do you think of this, Chris? A, how hard is confirmation going to be for getting anyone through? And keep in mind that it wasn't a cakewalk with the last 2 Republican Secretaries of Defense, Hagel and now I'm fucking forget his name. We've had 2. Is it going to be difficult this time around? Do you think it's going to be harder? And why if you're in the minority, why not just hole up and become a cabinet secretary?
I think at some point, the Republicans, they're going to have to confirm people. When they're in the majority, they can't block every single one in perpetuity.
Right.
But then on the other side, President Obama is going to have to understand that he's going to have to be dealing with a new reality come January. So he can't just put anyone out there that he wants. And so it's going to be a little bit of give and take. There's going to be consequences, I think, on both sides if people are not being confirmed in the next Congress. Obviously, we'll be writing about it and putting blame on one another. But look, I think we get pretty cynical pretty fast. But I have a feeling that there's enough people in Congress who actually believe that government has certain responsibilities and you have to appoint someone to these tasks to oversee these important things that the government does. And there'll be fights and there'll be skirmishes and there'll be a lot of vetting and backstabbing and everything. But at the end of the day, they're going to confirm somebody.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, they're not going to just and as the Republicans are in the majority, that sentence that has been written so much in Washington political writing, the Republicans have to show now that they can govern. Mm-hmm. It's just like the cliche of the post-election. I think they want to show something like that, but they also want to show that they've got enough backbone to fight Obama and stuff and possibly get what they would consider to be a better nominee than they would without them in charge. So they are tiptoeing on a fine balance beam here. But that's the case so much in politics, isn't it?
Yeah. Do you think it has to be a Republican?
No, I don't think so. I think there's plenty of Democrats, obviously, that are capable, and not only capable, but people that Republicans can vote for.
Mm-hmm. And like Secretary Gates and Secretary Hagel, do you think we're going to see a tell-all book from, I mean, in all seriousness, are we going to see some kind of really angry tell-all book from Hagel?
Look, okay, these jobs are really hard. You go through a lot of crap. Mm-hmm. You had better believe that when you get done with it, you're doing everything that's going to pay the bills. And that's writing a book and going on a media tour and getting paid to do speeches and basically getting paid back for all the garbage that you had to go through to be in high-profile government service.
Right.
I can't imagine, maybe you write a soft book with a couple juicy nuggets or something, or maybe you just go full YOLO and just rip and roar through, your time in the White House. But look, like these people do not have cushy jobs, and they don't necessarily get paid a lot while they're doing them.
Yeah.
So when they exit public service, writing a good, juicy book that everyone wants to hear from you and read, it really kind of makes all that pain you went through feel at least a little bit better. Money doesn't solve all problems, but it does ease a little pain, I'm sure.
Yeah. All right, let's. It eases a lot of pain, I think. Let's switch gears a little bit.
I've just heard.
Yeah, just let's move to you drinking margaritas with Steve King, and I'd really like to hear a lot about this. I mean, this is one of the things you've sort of made a signature sort of Chris Moody story in like doing something with a lawmaker, surfing, drinking martinis, that sort of thing. And and this is like an especially well-timed sort of margarita summit because this came around the time of President Obama's executive action on immigration reform. So did you get Congressman King drunk and did he say like, screw it, I'm for it or something? Like what happened?
All right, let's start at the beginning here. So President Obama makes his announcement on immigration Thursday night. It was Thursday, right? Or was it Wednesday? Last week.
Yeah, last week.
And then the next day, I get a note that says that Michelle Bachmann and Steve King are headed to the border the next day, and they want to go see the border, and they want to meet with Border Control agents. And I'm thinking, we got to get down there.
Yeah.
And my editors, thank goodness, are thinking, you should get down there.
Right.
So a producer at CNN and I went down to the border, and we spent the day with Michelle Bachmann and Steve King, some of the most anti-immigration reform lawmakers we have in Congress. And they've got plenty others that are with them, but they're certainly the most vocal. And they had gone to this place on the border a couple months ago and looked out over the Rio Grande. This is in a place called Roma, Texas, a little town right in South Texas. And they saw what they were told was an illegal border crossing right in front of them. And Michelle Bachmann pulled out her phone and she filmed it. And there's a little boat that's going across the river, And then she's like, "Oh, look, they're doing it right in front of two members of Congress."
Right.
So they went back in hopes that they might see this again. And so we went out to the edge of the same rock where they were a couple months ago and chatted with them about it. And we looked over the river, and all we saw was a couple of horses snacking on grass and some like guys fishing in the water.
Sounds frightening.
It's just terrifying. So no, nothing happened. And then Michelle Bachmann told us that surely they had seen our CNN handheld camera, and that was why they did
course.
not cross illegally. That's right. It was our fault.
Damn it, Moody. Ruining it again.
Well, all you have to do to secure the border is set CNN reporters along the border, and no one will ever cross. It's true. So after
that's the trick.
That's the trick. That's what we learned. So after that, Bachmann and King went to a town called McAllen, Texas, just about an hour down the road, and met with Border Patrol agents. And when they came out, I said, you guys want to go get some tacos and margaritas? And they said, yeah, we know the place. So we went to this restaurant in McAllen called the Picante, I think, Picante Grill. And Michelle Bachmann, for the record, I think had Diet Coke. But Steve King and I downed a couple of margaritas. We had some chips and salsa, and I think some enchiladas or fajitas. And the conversation, alas, was off the record.
Okay.
But I could, tell you the description of the scene there, what we did. And, one thing I try to get Republicans who talk a lot about so-called amnesty about is, okay, all right, we get it. You're against this so-called amnesty, letting people in the country have a pathway to citizenship. Got it. And you support
it's unfairly, right? It's letting people in the country unfairly.
Right. But they talk a lot about securing the border, restoring the rule of law, till you're blue in the face. I got it. All right. At the end of the day, we've got 11 million people in the United States living here unlawfully. And Republicans that talk a lot about immigration don't like to talk about what actually to do with those people. When you ask them, they say, well, first we got to secure the border, then we'll deal with it. Well, okay, fine. Let's play hypothetical here. What would you do? So I'm on the border with Steve King, repeatedly asking him, what are we going to do? And he'd be like, I don't know. We're not going to deal with that. And then I just said, look, man, I'm sorry. I don't understand what you're trying to tell me. Can you please try, help me out here? And he said, he kind of took a deep breath. He's like, listen, it's not my responsibility to bring people out of the shadows. Basically saying, I don't care. I mean, we're not going to do it. And then he said, they want to live in the shadows. That's why they came here, which I don't think that's entirely true. I'm sure there are some bad actors out there who definitely do, but there's
11 million people. You can't.
Yeah, there's a mix, but I think there's quite a few people that certainly don't, and we've seen that in the Dreamers and in the families of the Dreamers. So it was good to kind of get some honesty, at least, about what you think about these 11 million people. But we're going to have a whole video from the border on CNN up very soon from the time we're taping this, and it's going to be really interesting, I think. And I learned quite a bit on the border. I mean, I didn't know so much. There's obviously police and border patrol everywhere in these little towns, and a lot of the people we tried to talk to who lived in those towns refused to speak on camera because they said they were scared. Mm-hmm. Scared of what specifically, we're not entirely clear. We didn't want to put them in an uncomfortable situation. But we saw stuff like they have surveillance blimps that they brought in, that they used in Iraq and Afghanistan, that fly high over the sky and the border, and they watch these eagle eyes. This is in the United States of America. And the coyotes, bring immigrants over, put them in stash houses, and then drive them about 75 miles up the road, and then leave them in the fields to try to wander north and find their way. And a lot of them die out there. Not to get too morose here, but it's really heavy.
You gotta speak what's happening. Yeah.
And I was, it was really an eye-opening experience.
So why can't I mean, my sense is, do you think if there's a Republican president in 2016 or in the 114th Congress, there's going to be some fleshing out of a solution on immigration, something a little bit more? I mean, because it seems to me there's a divide in the GOP on what to really do about the 11 million people. And there are Republicans, like members of the Gang of Eight, like Senator Graham, who have, and I think he's been tweeting about some today, or saying some stuff today about it, that are very much like, we got to have a solution, we got to have some kind of plan. And then there are the hardliners like Steve King and like Ted Cruz, who don't want to see anything and are very focused on criticizing Democrats on violating the rule of law and securing the border and stopping amnesty. Is there any solution, do you think, down the line there? Is there anything that we're going to see different on this?
You know what's interesting is a lot of the guys that in the Republican side who are thinking about running for president have spoken positively about offering a pathway to legality for these 11 million. Rand Paul, Paul Ryan, I believe Chris Christie, a few others really have spoken out about this, and they might not have voted for that Gang of Eight bill. Well, obviously Marco Rubio, right there. Rob Portman has, kind of a moderate position on this as well. This is going to be really interesting how they talk about it in the context of 2016. We were talking about Steve King. Thing to point out, he's an Iowa lawmaker. He's not a newbie. This guy's been around for a long time, and he holds a lot of sway with a lot of caucus voters in Iowa. Now, a lot of these people running for president have gone through his district. They've fundraised with him. They've really been his buddy.
They've pheasant hunted with him.
Pheasant hunted. You got to go through that. Kiss the ring, right? Well, he's going to want to hear some real tough stuff on immigration, which is his issue. So how are these possible contenders going to balance between their past statements and wanting to make Steve King like you?
That's Steve Kingmaker, which, by the way, was a headline in TPM and later a headline in Politico, and we would like to say that was ours first. Boom.
When did you all write that story?
Last week.
Wait, you wrote that headline last week, and then Politico wrote it this week with the same headline?
I believe so. Hey, would I lie to you, Chris?
No, camera? I'm not looking skeptically at you.
I just, I do have to say sometimes CNN was, I think, the first to do the first at CNN headline, and TPM now does first at TPM.
You gotta plant your flag in the ground.
Yeah, but I want. So anyway, I want to be fully transparent. Okay, two things on this, because this is really interesting. One, Steve King will be sort of a kingmaker, right?
Sure.
And technically, if you're a moderate Republican, if you're like Rob Portman, Chris Christie, or Marco Rubio, wouldn't you kind of want to Steve King to hardline it all the way in 2016 and then get your endorsement as sort of like, and Steve King to be like, well, I don't think Governor Christie's great on immigration, but he's the candidate we want. And that would be sort of like a unity endorsement or something. Would that be possible?
That all really depends on if Steve King is going to endorse publicly. Because that's only one piece of the puzzle. These guys, a lot of them don't endorse publicly, and then behind the scenes, they really help you out.
Yeah.
They make some phone calls very quietly, or they hit you in the back with a knife. I mean, so what is in front of the scenes and what is behind the scenes can be two very different looking things. And I can't remember, but I don't think Steve King endorsed in the primaries in 2012, and I may have forgotten, but he at least took a long time to do it if he did it.
I think that sounds right, but yeah, you'd have to check me on that.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, he's going to endorse if somebody, really impresses him, I think, or he's at least just going to dangle it out there. Because that's what these guys do, is they dangle it out. They know that they're powerful just by their geography. I wrote a story earlier this year before the elections about a guy named Rod Blum. He just won the Iowa 1 seat. He's a Republican. He's a complete congressional newbie, just a normal dude who's a businessman that ran for office and got fairly lucky, but was also, showed some talent, of course.
Yeah.
He's just a guy, and all of a sudden,
he's the everyman.
He really is. Like, this is not fake. He's actually just this random guy.
Right.
All of a sudden, his phone is blowing up with requests to have meetings with Chris Christie and Bobby Jindal and, top Republicans from across the country just because of, I'm the Iowa congressman. Almost every possible 2016 contender, I think except Jeb Bush, called him on election night.
That's how it works.
Yeah, right? So he's new. Imagine the power that Steve King holds on getting people out and what they're going to do to court him if they're blowing up this guy, Rod Blum's phone, who just started his job, a couple of weeks ago.
So if you're the most pro-amnesty Republican and you're like, man, I have to get through this primary.
Like Marco Rubio having
like Marco Rubio or Jeb. Like, are you like, hey, Steve, you want to hang out right now? Here's a present for you. I mean, are you really like, even behind the scenes, like begging him to, at the very least, just leave you alone as you travel through Iowa?
I think you make an effort to have a meeting with the guy. You want to meet with everyone in the delegation. But you also don't want to pander. You want to put it out in front and say, this is what I believe, and we differ on that, but I think we are alike on a lot of things. I don't see why it hurts to at least reach out to the guy. And you can do that in different ways. You can host a fancy fundraiser for him that might make him forget what you believe about certain things, depending on how much money you raise for him.
I see. All right.
There are ways. And it also depends on how important the Iowa caucuses are going to be to this Republican election. I have a feeling they're going to be more important on the Republican side than they are on the Democratic side, depending on circumstances of Hillary and her competitors. But then again, Iowa hasn't picked the candidate in a couple cycles, so its own influence could be waning, although no Iowan will ever like to say that.
Right. So I want to move on a few things. I wanted to move on to very quickly touch on basically what caused my face to turn green for 5 days, which was your scoop a little while ago on 2 Twitter accounts that were used as sort of relay posts for information between GOP outside groups and committees. And I'm trying to boil this down in a concise way, but essentially campaign finance laws or campaign election laws prohibit direct coordination between outside groups and committees on certain types of information. These Twitter accounts were used to get around this, right? Mm-hmm. And you reported on 2 of them. One was named Bruno Gianelli, who's a character from The West Wing.
Who wanted to use soft money to unethically peddle campaigns, yeah.
And essentially, so these accounts were passing internal polling data to committees and back and forth. The rub is that they were publicly viewable, so anyone could come across them and look at them. But they were hidden, as you very nicely said in your report, in plain sight. So you'd have to know what you were looking for, and even then you'd have to be able to read the tweets, which were in a format where you would have to know the code to get around it. TPM
very clever.
Yeah, it's really smart. TPM followed up on this, and we talked to some election lawyers too, and as did you. And the sense was that this is like a real loophole. A little while later, Paul Blumenthal at the Huffington Post, I actually ran into you at the Capitol a little while ago, and I asked you, do you think Democrats are doing this too? I would love to try and figure this out and see if Democrats. And you said, yeah, it's possible. And Paul Blumenthal scooped me and reported that there is a Democratic account which was sort of doing the same thing. They were doing ad buys, and they were much more obvious about it,
Yeah, run by the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, have they been scared off for this practice? Do you think there are more Twitter accounts out there? How do you get around them?
Well, I know that there are more out there. I just didn't have access to them. Once I got wind that I was working on this story, I emailed the groups for comment, and all the accounts I had mentioned were deleted.
Screenshots are you always take
take screenshots. I'm going to take a screenshot of this conversation right now.
Do. Okay.
I just did it. I'll send it to you.
Boom.
So
great. Thank you.
We have record in case you want to delete anything. So yeah, they deleted all these things, and I assume they deleted the other ones. But here's the thing: if the FEC doesn't do anything about it, they'll just do it again. Who cares if CNN writes a report? We're getting away with something, and we're actually sharing valuable information with one another. So it's worth a story here and there if it ever leaks out. I actually just posted a story right a minute before we started doing this conversation. A liberal group filed a formal complaint with the FEC asking them to investigate this. So the FEC is going to take those complaints and possibly look into it. But I did talk with an FEC commissioner who said that it's been really frustrating and hard to get her commission to actually do hardcore investigations of these things because the commission is divided 3-3 between Republicans and Democrats, and the Republicans want very little to do with investigating these kinds of things. So they just kind of sit at a standstill.
Yeah.
And the groups know this. So they just do what they think they can get away with. And assume that it's worth the risk.
My sense from this whole episode and reporting some follow-ups on this was that essentially the internet has created this whole new level of gray area for campaign finance and election rules. And there are all these kinds of ways to get around it because information is technically available, but you have to know. I mean, this is the thing about that I always think about with the internet. The internet can build journalism careers, and it's just a treasure trove out there. There are all kinds of stories just sitting out there that we don't know about, or we haven't really found, or haven't blown up yet. And that comes from the story about Mitt Romney's 47% comment, which is this internet user who had the video was peddling it around for a little while, and Mother Jones and Huffington Post eventually picked it up, and sort of stuff like that. In terms of campaign finance rules, it seems like this is just sort of like the tip of the iceberg, and that there are probably a whole bunch of other practices out there that are pretty questionable and would be very easily ended and punished by the FEC, but it's on the internet. It's in this zone that is technically available to anyone.
Right, and they haven't issued much guidance. Now, they did issue guidance on putting out like B-roll video that a super PAC can then take and use as their own. So people feel very confident about that. But of course, the difference there is like with Mitch McConnell or Al Franken, who both put out cheesy B-roll videos for super PACs to use. They were from their own official YouTube accounts and from their own websites, unlike these Twitter accounts, which were basically masking the identities of super PACs and masking the identities of committees in order to secretly share this information with the secret code. So very, very different as far as intent. But kind of what I came away from it is that this is an obvious attempt to flout the spirit of the law, but to prove that someone has broken the actual law is very difficult. And these organizations spend a ton of money on incredibly bright lawyers who show them the way legally, and they're going to follow their lawyers. Now, sometimes, like in this case, they got caught, but I talked to a lot of Republicans and conservatives that were pretty damn proud of these groups for being so smart and flouting what they see as a stupid law. So that's kind of the attitude. If you read Red State, Mo Lane had a piece that really, I think, did a nice job of summing up the attitude, which, you know, that's the perspective there. And meanwhile, liberal heads are just exploding, and then they put their heads back together, and then they find that the FEC is not going to do anything, so liberal heads explode again. It just sounds exhausting to be.
And those groups are doing it too, man. All right, we gotta speed up a little bit. We gotta get to a new feature on Woodruff and Strauss, which is we ask the audience questions. And I want to start off with someone from my running group, John Weatherly, who noted he wanted me to ask you if you were aware that there's an 18th century pirate named Chris Moody. You are. Yeah. What do you know about Chris Moody?
I know he was a badass. When I was a kid, my dad bought me Christopher Moody's flag.
Really? What is
to
a
hang
flag
in my room? Well, you know how most pirate flags are black and it's got the Jolly Roger? Well, the black flag meant that if they caught you, they will steal all your stuff, but they might let you live. But the pirates who flew a red flag, which is what Christopher Moody flew, meant we are going to destroy and kill everybody on the ship.
Holy shit.
Let's have a chase. So when you saw a red flag, there's no quarter given. You just ran as fast as you could or fought because you know that they would try to kill every single one of you. So, yeah, I've read a little bit about Christopher Moody. My family, when they came over across the Atlantic, a lot of them came through South Carolina and the Carolinas coast, which is where Christopher Moody did a lot of his pillaging. I would love if there's a family connection. I haven't been able to find it on the old Ancestry.com thing quite yet, but you know, it's possible that he's kin, and you know, I think as bloody and terrible as he was, that's kind of fun.
We have another question, actually from a few people, but mostly from Garrett Quinn, who we're actually hoping to have on the show one day. On this past weekend, Marion Barry died, and also Tom Menino passed away, and I'm actually in the hometown of long-standing Mayor Daley. The era of the Daleys is over, but Marion Barry is the most recent of the colorful national profile mayor who has passed away. Woefully. And I wanted to know if you had any thoughts on that or him. I have to be honest, like, I think like a lot of people in DC, I don't really follow local politics, ironically, very much. But the local DC politics beat reporters I know are really into it and love it, and they're always like, there are these crazy stories, you got to pay more attention to this, and they matter. The DC City Council, I mean, their footprint is very visible in the city. So Marion Barry passed away, man, and I was reading up on his life before this. I mean, he was a pretty striking figure, from being this big civil rights icon to getting caught smoking crack.
He's a conflicting figure, very dualistic, because on one hand, he's absolutely beloved by so many people in the District of Columbia. On the other hand, he had some real demons, and he was involved in some bad stuff that we don't have to relitigate here. The best story about him is actually in the Weekly Standard. If anyone's ever read the great Weekly Standard profile of this guy, Matt Labash. It's actually in his book. It's the best profile you'll ever read of Marion Barry. Actually, Matt Labash had a book party a couple years ago, and who showed up? And it was at I think it was at Tucker Carlson's house, and Marion Barry walked through the door. You know what? He's a good sport, or was a good sport. Yeah. But he was involved in some really shady dealings, both personally and publicly, professionally, and which for journalists makes for the best kind of politician. Right.
That's who we all. That's how you profile. There's some good and the bad, and you try and unravel that.
The Republic be damned. We as journalists must be entertained.
We've got two more requests, and one is from the Daily Signal's Melissa Quinn, who we're also hoping to have on the show sooner or later. She's asking us to weigh in on the University of Florida's football and the firing of Will Muschamp. It is okay if oftentimes when we get questions, we don't know anything about it. We say we don't know. I don't know very much about this, Melissa. I'm hoping to have you on in the future, and we're going to talk about it. Chris, unless you've got anything on it?
The only thing I know about University of Florida is that they all wear jorts.
Okay, jorts. Maybe the next coach has to be a frequent jorts wearer.
He must.
I don't
Absolutely.
know. And then the last question comes from Claire Tonneson, who wanted us to ask about your hair, how you keep it so Moody-ish, I guess. I don't know. It's not very clear on that. Claire is a University of Oregon alum, and they're playing the University of Michigan tonight. And as I tirelessly, annoyingly, turn-offishly mention that I am a University of Michigan alum, and I'm hoping that Michigan's going to destroy Oregon tonight. It's a big game. There are two top 25 teams. So that's all I got, Chris.
What would she like to know?
I guess what do you do to keep your hair the way it is when you're crossing the border or swimming with congresswomen? Surfing with congresswomen.
Yeah, comb it in the morning with a hairbrush and just a little bit of hairspray, and that's just what it does.
All right. Well, there you go. I mean, this is So. That I feel like is a good note to end this on.
I think it is. I really do.
So CNN's Chris Moody, senior digital correspondent, thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed this episode. I hope we can have you on again and keep rocking.
Great to be here. A lot of fun.
All right. This is Daniel Strauss.
Say hi to your mom. Hi.
Oh, yeah. She's upstairs right now. Oh. Yeah. Anyway. All right. Thanks, Chris. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.